On the 19th of November of this year, the Third Committee of the 81st Session of the UN General Assembly, again at the initiative of Kiev and its Western sponsors, adopted the draft resolution, The Situation of Human Rights in the Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, including the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. The purpose of the authors of this document remains unchanged, an attempt to fix on various international platforms the unfounded political and territorial claims of Kiev. The Russian delegation put to a vote this next confrontational undertaking of the Kiev regime, absolutely detached from reality, and voted against it. In solidarity with us, 14 countries opposed this odious document. Thus, the initiators of this document again failed to achieve its consensus approval. It is telling that, in general, more than 90 states did not support the draft resolution. The excessively long text is written in the worst traditions of the public rhetoric and political fabrications of the Kiev regime, built on substitution of concepts, distortion and twisting of events, and, in fact, outright lies. At the same time, the authors failed to bring anything new in terms of substance, continuing to replicate unsubstantiated and not distinguished by novelty, accusatory insinuations against our country, against Russia. Let's look at some examples. A vivid example of the boundless cynicism and lack of principles of the drafters of the mentioned resolution is the so-called concerns formulated in connection with the allegedly existing systemic violation by the Russian authorities of the rights of ethnic and religious minorities, primarily the Crimean Tatars. Has anyone spoken with them? Not with those who call themselves such, but do not live in the territory, but with those who are there. Well, has anyone among those who inserted such wording into the text of the resolution spoken with them? Of course not. Developing this deliberately false premise, the document includes a call for our country to ensure conditions for education in the Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar languages and to cease blocking access to Ukrainian education, which is classified as systematic racial discrimination. At the same time, the Ukrainian initiators of the adopted resolution, its co-authors, and the countries that voted in its support do not see any problems with the deliberate repressive policy of Derussification carried out by the Kiev neo-Nazi regime, the creation of a mono-ethnic Ukrainian state in which there is no place for Russians, and for everyone else, however it turns out. Depending on which foot the president of Ukraine gets up on, that is how it will go. They also do not consider as a violation of human rights the consistent course taken by Bankova back in 2018 toward the liquidation of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, accompanied by persecutions and harassment, which we discussed today, including the use of physical violence against believers, parishioners, and clergy, the seizure of church property, the desecration of holy places, the outraging of relics. In this context, the reference in the text of the resolution to the decision of the International Court of Justice of 31st January 2024 in the case of Ukraine against Russia regarding the implementation of the provisions of the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism and the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as the call to fully and immediately implement the ruling of the International Court of Justice of the UN of the 16th of March 2022, is absolutely absurd. We would like to remind that the International Court of Justice recognized as legally null the claims of Ukraine under both lawsuits. It is obvious that with manic persistence, the Ukrainians are trying even by such means to convince the world majority of the opposite. No less absurd are the other accusations of human rights violations, which the regime of Zelensky is clearly projecting from the situation in its own country onto our country. Violations of freedom of speech have long become commonplace in Ukraine. What does this mean? The destruction of any mass media that does not follow the course set on Bankova, the cleansing of the political landscape of competitors, the redistribution of property, the persecution and intimidation of undesirable political and public figures, human rights defenders, journalists, and bloggers. Do you remember how one of the negotiators returned to Ukraine as part of the Ukrainian delegation and was immediately shot? Why? As they say, the Kiev regime had no time to explain. They simply said it just happened that way. There was confusion. The entrenched practice of extrajudicial executions, abductions, enforced disappearances, the wide and systematic use of torture against Russian prisoners of war. It is obvious that systemic, gross, and mass violations of human rights have long become an integral part and instrument of the misanthropic Kiev dictatorship. Such a rapidly degrading situation with the protection and ensuring of human rights in Ukraine became possible largely, if not entirely, thanks to the indulgence and silent approval of Western countries. As a result, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime has finally come to believe in its impunity and continues to unwind the spiral of violence and lawlessness. For our part, we would like once again to emphasize that Russia remains committed to its international obligations in the field of human rights. The Constitution of the Russian Federation and Russian legislation, which guarantee the citizens of the country the observance of all fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right to work, social security, healthcare, and education, apply to all constituent entities of the Russian Federation, including the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. Equally, on the territory of the regions reunited with Russia, the international treaties of the Russian Federation are fully in force, and their residents enjoy all human rights and freedoms guaranteed by human rights agreements, without any discrimination compared to residents of other regions of Russia. And regarding languages, for the first time in their lives, if we speak of modern and contemporary history, the residents of Crimea have received such a package of opportunities for studying their languages, for using their languages, for creating mass media in their languages. This is precisely under the guarantee of Russia, legally enshrined, formalized, and actively applied in practice.